He had been avoiding her for 3 years, not because he hated her, not because he was ashamed of what he had done, but because he knew with a certainty that sat in his chest like a stone that the moment she recognized him, everything he had built would fall apart. A quiet life. A small apartment. A daughter who still drew pictures of superheroes on napkins at dinner. He had built all of it carefully, deliberately. The way a man builds a wall around something he cannot afford to lose. Then his coworker called on a Tuesday evening and said, "Just go. One dinner. That's all I'm asking." He said no 3 times. Then his daughter looked up from her homework and said, quietly, without drama, "Dad, you deserve something good too." He went. He walked into the restaurant in a button-down shirt that still had a faint crease from the last time he had ironed it, 2 years ago. He told himself it would be fine. Whoever the woman was, he would be polite, share a meal, and go home. He rounded the corner into the private dining room and stopped. She was already seated. Her back was straight. Her dark blazer was perfectly pressed. Her hands were folded on the table with the same composed stillness he had seen in board meeting recaps, in company announcements, in the careful photographs that lined the executive hallway on the 14th floor. The hallway he cleaned every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5:45 a.m. before anyone else arrived. She looked up. Their eyes met. Neither of them moved. Then she smiled. Not the polished smile from the announcements. Something quieter. Something older. Finally, she said, "You actually showed up." He still had not spoken. She tilted her head slightly. "How long were you planning to keep hiding from me, Nathan?" The sound of his own name, his real name, not the one on his maintenance badge, hit him somewhere behind the ribs. He had no answer. He had been preparing to run for 3 years, and she had just cut off every exit with a single sentence. Nathan Cole woke at 4:50 a.m. every morning. Not because an alarm told him to, because his body had learned, over years of double shifts and broken routines, that sleep was a negotiation rather than a right. He took what he could, and he was grateful for it. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled of radiator heat and old carpeting. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. A kitchen where the overhead light flickered if you turned it on too fast. He had learned to turn it on slowly. He patted down the hall and looked in on Lily. She was 8 years old and slept like she was falling, arms flung out, blankets twisted, hair across her face. She had her mother's nose and his stubborn jaw. And she was the best thing he had ever done. And some mornings, he stood in her doorway for a full minute, just to make sure she was real. There was a phase, in the first year after Claire died, when he had checked on Lily 3 or 4 times a night. Not because she was in any danger, she was healthy and safe and sleeping, but because the apartment had become the kind of quiet that felt hostile, and checking on her was the only thing that felt purposeful at 2 in the morning. He had eventually stopped, mostly. He still looked in before he left. He made coffee. He made her lunch, peanut butter, apple slices. A folded note that said something dumb and fatherly, like, "Have a great Tuesday, kid." He packed his work bag. He left 20 minutes before she woke up, because Mrs. Petrov across the hall had a key and would walk her to the school bus. Mrs. Petrov was 71 and had lived in the building since before Nathan was born. She had 2 grown children in other states, and a cat named Biscuit, and a habit of leaving small containers of homemade soup outside Nathan's door with a post-it note that just said "eat." He did not know what he would have done without her in those first months. He tried not to think about it. He took the 5:20 train downtown. Hartwell Financial occupied floors 9 through 15 of a glass tower on Meridian Avenue. Nathan had worked building maintenance there for 2 years and 7 months. He knew every utility closet, every circuit panel, every HVAC filter that needed to be changed on a rotating schedule. He was good at the job, methodical, quiet, invisible, in the way that men in gray uniforms are invisible, in places that are built to impress. He preferred it that way. The executive floors were floors 13 and 14. He cleaned them early, before the day began, so that the carpet was pristine and the glass partition walls were streak-free by the time the first assistant arrived at 7. He had a system. Start at the far end of 14. Work his way back toward the elevator bank. Be gone before 6:30. The system had worked without incident for most of his time at Hartwell. Then, 7 months ago, The company had hired a new CEO. Her name was Victoria Marsh, and Nathan Cole had known her before. The news of her appointment had moved through the building the way these things always do, in fragments, in break room conversations, in the particular charged air that surrounds any change at the top of an organization. The name meant nothing to most of them. To Nathan, it meant he had stood very still in a utility closet for 40 seconds, while the information settled into him, and then he had continued replacing a filter, and said nothing to anyone. He had spent the better part of that evening sitting at the kitchen table after Lily was asleep, working through the math of his options. He could leave. He was qualified for other maintenance positions. His record at Hartwell was clean. His supervisor had told him more than once that he was the most reliable person on the team. Leaving would be uncomplicated, but Lily's school was 4 blocks away. Mrs. Petrov was across the hall. The commute on the 5:20 train was 32 minutes, and he had read 3 books on it in the past year. He had built something small and functional here, and he did not want to dismantle it because of a thing that had happened in another life. He stayed. He modified his schedule. He was careful. It had worked for 7 months. He had seen her first on a Tuesday in October, when she swept through the building on her initial orientation tour. He had been replacing a light fixture in the corridor, when the group rounded the corner, a cluster of executives and board members, and in the center of them, a woman in a charcoal coat, who moved like she had already decided how every room would be rearranged. He had turned his back before she saw his face. He was not sure why. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that had kept him quiet and careful for 3 years. After that, he modified his schedule. He started coming in at 4:45 instead of 5:20. He was off the 14th floor by 5:50. While the building was still mostly dark, he learned which elevator she used in the mornings. He took the other one. It was not a complicated system. It required only attention and a willingness to be the first person in every room and the last one anyone noticed leaving. He was very good at that. On the evening his co-worker Marcus first mentioned the blind date, Nathan was eating dinner across from Lily, who was telling him about the food chain with the solemnity of a scientist delivering peer review findings. "Owls eat mice," she said. "And mice eat seeds. So if there were no seeds, there would be no mice. And if there were no mice, there would be very sad owls," Nathan said. She looked at him seriously. "Yes. Exactly." His phone buzzed. Marcus had texted a name, a description, and the phrase, "She's normal. I promise. Just go." Nathan set the phone face down. Lily glanced at it. "Who's that?" "Nobody. You made a face." "I always make a face." She considered this. "Dad. When's the last time you did something just for yourself?" He opened his mouth. "Besides sleep," she added. He closed it again. She went back to her homework, and he sat there for a moment, looking at his daughter, 8 years old, doing math problems with her pencil tucked behind her ear, and felt the particular ache of being known too well by someone too young. Victoria Marsh did not become CEO of Hartwell Financial by being imprecise. She had spent 15 years building a record quiet years, mostly, of careful work and accurate judgment and a refusal to flinch in meetings where everyone else was flinching. She had left 2 companies before this one, both times because the senior leadership had asked her to approve something she could not approve. Both times she had walked away without drama. And both times she had found something better. Hartwell was the best thing yet. It was also, at the moment she took the role, a company in quiet trouble, nothing visible from the outside, but the kind of deep structural problem that only shows up in the numbers if you know exactly what you are looking for. She knew what she was looking for. She had taken the job specifically because she knew she could fix it. She was 37. She was precise and self-contained, and did not, as a general rule, waste time on things she could not control. The blind date was her brother's idea. "You need to leave the office sometimes," he had said, at Sunday dinner. With the confident tone of someone who had been married for 12 years, and believed this qualified him to dispense wisdom. "Just one dinner. The guy's a friend of a friend. He's decent. You might like him." Victoria had said, "I have a 7 o'clock call on Thursday. The dinner's at 7:30. I have a 7:30 call on Thursday." He had looked at her across the table, with the expression of a man who understood that his sister used conference calls as emotional weather shields, and she had looked back with the expression of a woman who did not care. She agreed to go anyway, not because he persuaded her, but because there was a part of her small and quiet, and rarely given any authority, that was tired of using work as the only available architecture for a life. She arrived at the restaurant 12 minutes early. She ordered water. She read 3 emails. She set her phone face down and sat with her hands folded, and told herself she was simply gathering data. A single dinner. A reasonable sample size. She would know within 15 minutes whether this was worth anyone's time. She heard him before she saw him, the slight hesitation at the entrance to the private room. The pause that most people make when they arrive somewhere alone and scan for a face they have never met in person. She looked up. For one strange, disorienting second, she did not process what she was seeing. Then she did. He was taller than she remembered. His hair was shorter. There were lines around his eyes that had not been there before. He was wearing a button-down shirt that was slightly too formal and slightly too careful, the shirt of a man who had taken the occasion seriously enough to iron something. Nathan Cole. She had thought about him over the years. Not obsessively. Not with any particular agenda. Just the way you think about a thing that was left unfinished, with the low, persistent awareness that somewhere a sentence had ended mid-word. She did not show any of this on her face. She smiled. She said, "Finally, you actually showed up," and she watched him go perfectly still, the way a man goes still when he realizes he has been cornered by something he has been outrunning for a very long time. He sat down because there was nothing else to do, not because he was brave, because his legs made the decision before his brain caught up. And then he was in the chair across from her, and the waiter was handing him a menu, and the moment for running had passed. Victoria watched him settle. She did not speak right away. She had learned, a long time ago, that silence was more useful than questions in the first 30 seconds of a difficult conversation. Silence let people organize their defenses, and organized defenses were easier to read than improvised ones. He looked at the menu without seeing it. "You knew," he said finally, "that it was you?" "No, not until you walked in." She paused. "My brother set this up." "I don't think he knew anything." "Right." He put the menu down. "This is unexpected," she said. "Yes, a beat. You've been avoiding me," she said. It was not a question. "I work the early shift. Our schedules don't overlap." "Nathan." Something in the way she said his name, not sharp, not accusing, just precise, made him look up. "I've seen you twice from a distance," she said. "Both times you turned away before I could see your face. I wasn't certain it was you, but I noticed." A pause. "I always noticed things about you." He said nothing. "Why are you working building maintenance?" she asked. "That is a genuine question. Not judgment. It's a job. You have an engineering degree and 7 years of cybersecurity experience." "Had," he said. Past tense. She looked at him for a moment. The restaurant was quiet around them, white tablecloths, low light, the soft sound of other people's conversations at a careful remove. It was the kind of place designed to make difficult things feel manageable. "Tell me," she said. "There's nothing to tell." "Nathan." He picked up his water glass. Set it down. "How's the company?" he asked. "Hartwell. I hear the restructuring is going well." "Don't change the subject." "I'm not changing the subject. I'm choosing a different one." She almost smiled at that. Almost. They ordered food they did not particularly want, because it gave their hands something to do. He asked her about the industry. She answered precisely, and without embellishment. And she asked him questions in return. And they moved through the surface of a conversation, the way two people move through a crowded room, carefully, aware of each other, not yet saying anything that mattered. She let it go on for a while. Then she set her fork down and looked at him directly. "I've been at Hartwell for 7 months, she said. "In my second week, I went through the security incident records from the last 5 years. Old habit, I like to know what problems a company has already survived before I start worrying about new ones." She paused. "I found the Meridian breach. The one from 3 years ago." His expression did not change. "The report listed a contractor," she continued, who identified and isolated a critical vulnerability before it propagated across the client network. The contractor's name was redacted. The internal recommendation was that the contractor be retained permanently. Another pause. The contractor had also, according to the incident record, accepted full responsibility for a secondary system failure that the review board ultimately decided was caused by pre-existing infrastructure neglect, which meant the contractor left, and the board moved on. The silence between them was different now, heavier. "That was you," she said. He did not answer. "Nathan, it was a long time ago," he said. He had not talked about it in 3 years. Not to Marcus. Not to Mrs. Petrov, who had known him since before Lily started school, and who asked careful questions over tea on Sunday evenings. Not to the counselor the hospital had offered him after Claire died, whom he had seen 3 times before deciding that talking about it made it more real rather than less, and that he did not have the bandwidth for more real. There had been, in the immediate aftermath of the Avery Lund situation, a brief window where he had considered fighting it. He had the supplementary notes. He had his original reports. He had a paper trail that would have told a different story than the one Grayson had constructed, but fighting it meant lawyers, and lawyers meant money, and by that point Claire was on her 3rd round of treatment, and Lily was 6 years old, and Nathan was sleeping 4 hours a night on the hospital pull-out chair, and making sure he was home for breakfast every morning so that Lily had at least one consistent, predictable thing in her life. The energy required to wage a professional battle simply did not exist. He had signed the agreement. He had taken the payout less than he was owed, more than he had the fight to negotiate, and he had walked away. He had told himself it was a calculation. He had told himself it was the right one. He still believed that. That was the part people sometimes misunderstood when he allowed himself to think about it. He did not believe he had made a mistake. He had triaged. He had prioritized the thing that was most irreplaceable, which was being present for his family. Everything else, the career, the reputation, the professional record, those were recoverable, in theory. The theory had taken 3 years to begin testing. But something about the way Victoria was looking at him, not with pity, not with appetite, just with the steady attention of a person who intended to understand a thing correctly, made the usual defenses feel flimsy. "I was brought in on a consulting contract," he said. 3 years ago. Avery Lund Capital. They had a suspected breach and needed someone external. "I know," she said. "I was on their risk committee at the time." He looked at her. "I didn't know it was you," she said. The consultants were anonymous to the committee. "We only received summary reports." He processed that for a moment. "Then, I found the intrusion. It was deeper than anyone had mapped. It had been sitting in the system for 11 months. Reading, but not yet writing. If it had triggered, the client data exposure would have been significant." He paused. "I also found a secondary flaw. In a legacy authentication module that the infrastructure team had flagged 18 months earlier and been told to defer. The deferred patch," she said. "Right." I reported both findings. The lead infrastructure director, a man named Grayson, decided that the best way to handle the secondary flaw was to let me take responsibility for it. The story became, "Contractor overlooked a critical vulnerability. Contractor has been released. Problem solved." The client didn't have to hear about their own team's negligence. The board didn't have to discipline anyone internal. Victoria said nothing. "I could have fought it," Nathan said. "I thought about it, but by that point my wife had been in the hospital for 2 months, and I had a 6-year-old at home, and I didn't have the energy for a legal dispute that I might not win anyway. So I took the money they offered to go quietly, signed what they asked me to sign, and left." A long silence. "Claire," Victoria said. "Your wife. She passed 8 months after the breach." "Yes." She did not say she was sorry. He was grateful for that. Sorry was a word that people used when they did not know what else to offer. And he had heard it so many times after Claire died that it had lost all its shape. Instead, she said, "And you came back here?" "To Hartwell. I needed stable hours, benefits, a job that let me be home in the evenings." He looked at the table. "Maintenance is honest work. Nobody calls you at midnight with a critical incident. And when you found out I was the new CEO? He was quiet. You thought I would recognize you, she said. Not an accusation. Just reading the logic aloud. I thought if you connected the dots, it would make things complicated. For me, for Lily. Your daughter? Yes. Victoria picked up her wine glass and held it without drinking from it. She was looking across the room at nothing in particular, and Nathan had the unsettling impression that she was doing multiple calculations simultaneously. Then she looked back at him. I know who Grayson is, she said. I know what he did. I reviewed the full incident record. Victoria, I'm not going to do anything you don't want me to do, she said. I'm telling you that I know. That's all. A pause. I also want you to know that none of what happened reflects on you. In my assessment, what you found that week was exceptional work. The system survived because of you. He looked at her for a long moment. That doesn't change much, he said. No, she agreed. It doesn't. His phone rang at 8:47 p.m. He glanced at it, and his entire posture changed the careful stillness he had maintained all evening, dissolving in a single second into something alert and present. Victoria watched the transformation with interest. It was like watching a man step out of a disguise. Sorry, he said, already reaching for the phone. It's my daughter. Take it, she said. He stepped away from the table. She could not hear the conversation, only the register of his voice lower than it had been, warmer. The clipped precision replaced by something easier. She heard him laugh once, briefly, at something the child said. He came back 2 minutes later. She wanted to know if I ordered dessert. Did you? I haven't decided yet. He sat down. She also wanted to know if the person I was having dinner with was nice or just fancy. What did you tell her? He considered the question more seriously than she expected. I said I was still figuring that out. Victoria looked at him. That seems accurate. He almost smiled. They ordered dessert. They ate it slowly. The conversation moved to other things: his daughter's enthusiasm for animal biology, her insistence on naming every pigeon she encountered, a specific pigeon named Colonel, who lived near their apartment building, and was, according to Lily, probably smarter than most people. Victoria found herself less interested in managing the conversation, and more interested in simply having it, which was unusual enough that she noticed. What does she know? Victoria asked. About what happened? About why you left that job. She was 5 when it happened. She knows her dad does maintenance, and that her mom died, and that we have a good life. He paused. That's enough for now. And when she's older? When she's older, I'll tell her the truth. That her dad made a calculation in a hard moment and lived with it. His voice was even. I don't regret it. I would make the same choice again. Claire needed me home. Lily needed me home. Everything else was secondary. Victoria was quiet for a moment. That's not weakness, she said. I know. Some people would see it that way. Some people have the luxury of not having a 6-year-old and a dying wife to go home to. There was no bitterness in it. Just facts. Stated cleanly. She looked at him across the table, this man who had been cleaning her office floors for 7 months, who had rerouted his entire schedule to avoid her, who was sitting here now in his slightly too careful shirt, talking about his daughter's pigeon, and felt something shift in her chest. Not dramatic. Just a slow, structural rearrangement, like a building settling into its foundation. I'd like to meet her, she said. Someday. If that's all right. He looked at her. I'm not saying tonight, she added. Or soon. I'm saying eventually. If this, she stopped, recalibrated. If there's any reason for an eventually. He did not answer right away. That was all right. She had learned not to mistake a man's silence for absence. Maybe, he said finally. It was the most honest word she had heard all evening. She did not sleep well that night. That was not unusual. Victoria Marsh had not been a reliable sleeper since her early 30s, when she had learned that the brain does its most inconvenient thinking between midnight and 3 a.m. She had developed strategies. A book. A specific tea. A notepad on the nightstand for writing down whatever was circling, so it could stop circling. She wrote Nathan Cole's name on the notepad. Then she wrote Grayson. Then she wrote Meridian Incident, full record. She stared at the list for a moment, then she put the pad down and told herself it could wait until morning. It waited until 6:15 a.m., which was roughly when morning began in her estimation. She had the incident file pulled from archives by the time her assistant arrived at 7. She read it carefully, not for the first time, but this time, with context she had not had before. The contractor's redacted name, the board's decision to accept his explanation and close the investigation, the internal memo from Grayson, carefully worded, strategically imprecise, that had laid the groundwork for shifting responsibility. She read the original infrastructure team report, dated 18 months before the incident. The deferred patch flag was clear. The risk assessment was unambiguous. The approval to defer had come from Grayson himself. She sat with that for a while. Then she called the head of her legal team, a careful woman named Patricia Haynes, who had been with Hartwell for 11 years and had a reputation for being exactly as thorough as a situation required, and not 1 degree more. "I need to review an old incident record with you," Victoria said. "There may be a question of misattributed professional responsibility." Patricia said, "How old?" 3 years. "Contractor or employee?" "Contractor, initially." "The question is whether the record accurately reflects the source of the failure." A pause. "Do you have a specific outcome in mind?" "I want to know what the record should say," Victoria said. "That's all." She did not tell Nathan. Not yet. Not because she was trying to manage him. She had learned that managing people who had already been managed by worse actors than her tended to backfire comprehensively. But because she was not yet certain what the investigation would find, and she did not make promises she could not keep. That was not nothing, actually. In Victoria's experience, it was rarer than it should have been. 3 weeks passed. He ran into her once, genuinely not by schedule misalignment, but because he was replacing a hallway fixture on floor 14, and she came off the elevator earlier than usual. He heard the doors and turned, and she was there. And neither of them executed the smooth course correction that his 3 years of careful avoidance had trained him for. They looked at each other for a moment in the early morning quiet. "Good morning," she said. "Morning." She did not stop, did not make it into anything more than what it was. Just walked to her office and let him finish his work. He stood there for a moment after she had gone, aware that something had changed, but unable to name exactly what. He texted her that evening. He was not entirely sure why. He told himself it was because she had left a light on in the private dining room, and maintenance had to note that sort of thing. But that was not true, and he knew it was not true, and he texted her anyway. "How's the restructuring going?" She responded 40 minutes later. "Slower than I'd like. Better than it was." Then, "How's the Colonel?" He stared at his phone. Then he went to the window, where Lily had reported the pigeon's recent movements with the regularity of a field researcher. Present and accounted for. Lily says he found a girlfriend. Good for him. He set the phone down, then picked it up again. "She wants to know if you've ever seen a pigeon do a courtship display." "I have not." She says it's dramatic. The male puffs up and walks in circles. She says it's the most ridiculous thing she has ever seen, and she respects it. A pause. Then, "That's the most accurate description of professional networking I've ever heard." He laughed. Quietly, in the kitchen, with his daughter asleep down the hall. It was a small laugh. The kind that surprises you. He had not been surprised by a laugh in a long time. He asked her to coffee the following Friday. Not dinner coffee was lower stakes, easier to exit, a reasonable middle ground for two people who were still figuring out the terms. She said yes. They met at a place on Callaway Street that was not particularly fancy. It had mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, and a barista who spelled Victoria's name wrong on the cup. She did not correct it. He noticed that she did not correct it and filed it away. This small evidence that she was softer at the edges than her professional reputation suggested. They talked for 2 hours. About the industry. About her path to Hartwell. About the specific difficulty of making systemic changes in organizations that had calcified around their own inefficiencies. She was precise and analytical, in a way that he recognized from his own working years, the way an engineer thinks, linearly, with a fixed relationship between problem and solution. He told her about how Lily had recently decided she wanted to be a marine biologist. And before that, an astronaut. And before that, someone who trained bears. Victoria had listened to all three, with the same focused attention she gave to quarterly reports, which was the sort of thing that should not have moved him but did. He also told her, without entirely planning to, about the first winter after Claire died, how he had bought a real Christmas tree because Lily had asked for one, and how they had spent an entire Saturday decorating it with ornaments that still had Claire's handwriting on the backs, the little tags she had made for each one, noting where they had gotten it, which year. He had not known about the tags until Lily turned one over and read aloud. Ski trip. Year 1. Mom says this one looked like a potato. Lily had laughed. So he had laughed too. Victoria was quiet for a moment when he finished. That's good parenting, she said. It was survival, he said. Those aren't mutually exclusive. He looked at her across the table. She was holding her coffee cup with both hands, the wrong name on the side. The afternoon light was coming through the window at a flat angle. The particular light of mid-autumn that makes everything look like it is being looked at for the last time. He thought, I have been alone for 3 years, and I forgot that it was possible to sit across from someone and simply feel less alone. He did not say it, but he thought it. It came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after she had asked Patricia to begin the review. The record is inaccurate, Patricia said. She was not someone who softened things with preamble. Victoria appreciated that. The original contractor's report clearly identifies the deferred patch as a pre-existing infrastructure decision. His supplementary notes, which were filed but not attached to the main record, explicitly state that the secondary vulnerability was not within the scope of his assessment and predated his engagement by over a year. Victoria said, And Grayson? The board memo that shaped the final incident report omits the supplementary notes. It does not appear to be accidental. A silence. What are our options? Victoria asked. We can amend the public record to reflect the accurate findings. We can issue a formal statement acknowledging the contractor's correct assessment and the source of the secondary failure. If the contractor chooses to pursue any professional recourse, the corrected record would be supportive of his position. Patricia paused. Grayson retired 2 years ago. He's no longer with the company. That's not why I'm doing this. I didn't think it was. I'm informing you because it affects the scope of internal consequence. Amend the record, Victoria said. Prepare the statement. I'll review the draft tonight. She called Nathan that evening. He was quiet for a long time after she told him. She could hear Lily in the background, the sound of a television. Something with animal noises. You didn't have to do this, he said. I know. Victoria, you didn't. The record was wrong, she said. That's all. It needed to be corrected. It has nothing to do with. She stopped. Recalibrated. It has everything to do with the fact that you did excellent work, and the documentation was falsified. That's a corporate record problem. I'm the CEO. It's my job to fix corporate record problems. Another silence. You're not going to say thank you, are you? She said. I'm thinking, he said. Take your time. He took 3 full seconds. Which, for Nathan Cole, was roughly the equivalent of a lengthy speech. Then, thank you, she said. Don't. I didn't do it for gratitude. I know, he said. That's why it means something. The statement was released on a Monday, buried inside a broader press communication about Hartwell's compliance initiatives. Victoria had deliberately kept it understated a correction to an old incident record. Language that was accurate without being dramatic, the kind of administrative revision that the business press would not find interesting enough to cover in depth. It was seen by the people who needed to see it. Nathan received 2 calls the following week. One from an old colleague who had known him during the Avery Lund contract. One from a firm he had worked with briefly before everything had unraveled. Both calls were friendly, tentative, opening doors without forcing them. He did not call either of them back immediately. He told Victoria about it on a Saturday, while they were walking along the river path near his apartment. Lily was 10 feet ahead of them, photographing a duck with the seriousness of a professional wildlife photographer. What are you going to do? Victoria asked. I don't know yet. You don't have to decide anything. I know. He watched his daughter crouch down to get a better angle on the duck. Lily wants to know if you like Thai food. Victoria blinked. She does? She's been asking for 2 weeks. She wants to invite you to dinner. She says she'll make dumplings, which means I'll make dumplings and she'll direct. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Not the calculating quiet she used at work, the other kind. The kind that meant something was getting through. Tell her yes, she said. Dinner was a Thursday evening. Lily had taken the invitation with the same focused energy she applied to all important projects. She had a list. She had assigned tasks. She had strong opinions about the dumpling-to-soup ratio. Victoria arrived at 6:45 with a bottle of sparkling water and a book about ocean creatures that she had found at a used bookstore, slightly worn, annotated in the margins by a previous owner, the kind of book that had already been loved. Lily opened the door before Nathan reached it. She looked at Victoria for approximately 2 seconds. Then she said, "You're prettier than I thought." Nathan made a pained sound from somewhere behind her. Victoria crouched down to Lily's level. "Thank you. You're taller than I expected." Lily considered this. "I'm in the 92nd percentile for my age." "That's impressive. Dad says it's genetic." "Do you want to see the duck photos?" "Very much," Victoria said. Nathan stood in the kitchen doorway and watched his daughter lead Victoria to the couch, already pulling up the duck photographs with the air of a curator preparing an exhibition. Victoria sat and looked at every single one with genuine attention, asking questions he could not quite hear from where he stood. He turned back to the dumplings. He folded them the way Claire had taught him, the edges pinched into small pleats. Lily had been learning the same technique for a year. She was almost there. Behind him, he could hear Lily explaining something about mallard migration patterns. Her voice animated and confident. The particular register she used when she had an audience that was actually listening. He was aware, standing there at the counter, of something that was not quite happiness, or not only happiness. It was closer to recognition, the sense that a thing was fitting into a space that had been empty for longer than he had admitted. He did not examine it too closely. He folded the last dumpling and put it in the steamer and called them both to the table. Dinner lasted longer than he had expected. Lily had questions. She had been saving them up, apparently, with the strategic patience of someone who understood that certain adults required a gradual introduction before being asked the important things. By the third dumpling, she had covered Victoria's opinions on sharks, positive. Her position on whether penguins could survive in New York, complicated, and whether it was true that CEOs had to eat lunch at their desks. "Sometimes," Victoria said. "That seems lonely." "It is, a little." Lily considered this. "You should come here more. We have a table." Nathan kept his eyes on his bowl. Victoria said, "That's a very good offer. You can bring stuff if you want," Lily added magnanimously. "Like last time with the book." "That was a good one. I'll bring another. Something with whales," Lily said. "I've been doing whale research. I'll see what I can find." Lily nodded, satisfied, and returned to her dumplings with the air of a diplomat who had successfully concluded a negotiation. Nathan glanced up and found Victoria looking at him across the table with an expression that was quiet and unguarded, and that he did not have a name for yet. He returned the calls, both of them. The first was a courtesy. He was not interested in the project they were considering, but he said so directly, and they parted on good terms. The second was more complicated. The firm was smaller than where he had worked before, less prestigious, building infrastructure security for mid-market companies rather than the institutional clients he had spent his career on. The work was concrete and technically interesting, and the hours, they assured him, were realistic. He told them he would think about it. He told Victoria about it that weekend. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I'm not going to come back to Hartwell," he said. "I want to be clear about that. Whatever is or isn't happening between us, that's not something I'm comfortable with. I wasn't suggesting it. I know. I'm saying it for myself." "So it's said." She nodded. She understood the need to state things clearly, to put them in the record without ambiguity. It was the same instinct she had. Professionally. The need for accurate documentation. "The small firm," he said. "It's the kind of work I was good at. Practical problems. Real systems. I'd be home by 6. That matters," she said. It matters most, he said. After everything. That still matters most. She did not try to arrange his priorities. She had spent the better part of her career in rooms where people ranked ambition above everything and called it wisdom. She had never entirely believed it. He took the job. He gave his notice at Hartwell on a Tuesday. His supervisor, a quiet man named Dennis, who had always treated him decently, shook his hand and said it had been a pleasure having him on the team. Nathan thanked him and meant it. Dennis was not responsible for any of the larger architecture of Nathan's life. He had just been a decent man in a gray uniform, the same as Nathan, and that was worth acknowledgement. He cleaned floors 13 and 14 one last time on his final day. He did it the way he had always done it, methodically, early, leaving everything clean. He was at the elevator bank at 5:48 a.m. when he heard his name. Victoria was standing at the entrance to the executive corridor, holding 2 cups of coffee. She had come in early. He looked at her for a moment. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said. She crossed the distance between them and handed him a cup. "I wanted to." They stood in the empty corridor, in the half-light before the day started, drinking coffee. The building was quiet around them. In an hour it would fill with the particular noise of a company going about its business, and none of the people who walked past this spot would know that anything had happened here. That was all right. Not everything needed an audience. He said, "She asked me this morning if you were going to keep coming to dinner. What did you tell her?" "I said I didn't know. That it was up to you." Victoria looked at him. The early light was thin and gray and entirely unromantic. She was wearing the blazer he had seen her in at the restaurant, the first one. The night they had both shown up to a blind date that turned out to be a reckoning. She looked the same as she had that night, and completely different. "Tell her yes," she said, "as long as she keeps showing me the duck photos." He almost smiled. Then he did smile. It was not a large smile. Nathan Cole did not traffic in large expressions, but it reached his eyes. "She took 47 pictures of that duck," he said. "I know. I've seen 31 of them. I'm invested now." They took the elevator down together and went out into the city, where the morning was just beginning and the streets were still mostly empty. He went one direction. She went another. At the corner she turned and called back. "Nathan." He stopped. "You asked me once at the restaurant. That first night you said, 'How long were you planning to keep hiding?'" She looked at him from across 20 feet of morning air. "That was my question," she said. "Not yours." He thought about that. "I know." "Good," she said. "Don't forget it." She turned and walked away. He watched her go, and then he walked the other direction, toward the train that would take him home to make breakfast, and to his daughter, who would report on Colonel's movements, and to a life that was, for the first time in a long time, pointing forward. The dumplings had become a Thursday thing. Not every Thursday. Sometimes Victoria had a late call. Sometimes Nathan had an early morning site visit at the new job. Sometimes Lily had soccer, and came home too tired to do anything, except eat crackers and watch nature documentaries. But most Thursdays, enough that Lily had stopped asking whether Victoria was coming, and started asking what time she was arriving. It was a Thursday in late autumn when Lily looked across the dinner table and said, with the directness that 8-year-olds deploy without warning, "Are you guys going to get married?" The kitchen went very quiet. Nathan set his fork down. Victoria looked at the child with an expression that was carefully not any one identifiable thing. Lily looked between them. "I'm just asking." "For planning purposes." "Planning purposes," Nathan repeated. "I want to know if I should start telling people you have a girlfriend or a wife. It's different for how I explain it." Victoria looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Victoria. "Girlfriend," Nathan said. For now, Lily considered this with the gravity of a person weighing evidence. Then she nodded once, satisfied, and returned to her dumplings. "Okay," she said. "But don't take too long. Colonel is already on his second egg." Victoria pressed her lips together. Nathan looked at the ceiling. Then they both, helplessly, laughed. Later, when Lily had gone to bed and the kitchen was clean, they sat on the small couch, with their feet on the coffee table, and the city making its quiet sounds outside. "She's not wrong," Victoria said. "About Colonel? About the other thing." He was quiet for a moment. Not the hiding kind of quiet. The thinking kind. No, he said. She's not. Victoria leaned her head back against the couch. She was not in her blazer. She was in a gray sweater that was slightly too big and slightly too comfortable looking for a woman of her professional reputation. She looked, Nathan thought, like a person who had found somewhere to put the weight down. He understood that feeling. You know what she asked me last week? Victoria said. What? She asked me if CEOs have to be serious all the time, or if they're allowed to be funny sometimes. What did you tell her? I told her the good ones know when to be which. He thought about that. She accepted that? She said, so, you can be funny but you're choosing not to. Nathan looked at her. Victoria looked at him. She's not wrong about that either, he said. No, she agreed. She is not. Outside, the city settled into itself. On the windowsill, Lily had left a drawing kernel in profile, colored in with gray crayon, and a single orange beak, labeled in her careful print. My pigeon, not actually mine. Below that, in smaller letters. Dad's girlfriend. Also, likes him. Nathan had found it there 2 days ago and had not moved it. He was not going to move it. There was a version of his life, he knew, where the Avery Lund incident had gone differently, where he had fought, where he had won, where his professional record had stayed clean, and his career had continued on its original trajectory. He thought about that version sometimes. The way you think about a road not taken, without particular regret. He had a daughter who named Pigeons. He had an apartment where the kitchen light flickered if you turned it on too fast, and where he had learned to turn it on slowly. He had a woman asleep on the couch beside him who had corrected a 3-year-old lie in a corporate record because it was the right thing to do. He had traded one version of a life for another, without knowing, at the time, what the exchange would eventually yield or what shape it would take. He was keeping this one, entirely. Without reservation,